Better Call Saul Season 6 Episode 10 has just released on Netflix and AMC, and we get quite the self-contained episode, yet one that will likely have important messages for where this show goes. In this spoiler review, I'm going to be giving you my recap of Better Call Saul Season 6 Episode 10, entitled Nippy, alongside discussing my general thoughts towards it. But before I get into it, if you want to see more videos on the final episodes of Better Call Saul, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. Also, feel free to check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Instagram at Cortex Videos, which is all linked in the description below. But with that out the way, let's dive into my recap and review for Better Call Saul Season 6 Episode 10. So the latest episode of Better Call Saul is sure to be one that gets mixed reactions, but I myself found it a very meaningful addition to the current situation and inner feelings of one Gene Takovic. In particular, I think it was a perfect self-contained episode to really get us ready for what is likely going to be an eventful final 3 installments. Better Call Saul's parent show Breaking Bad gave us one of the most critically acclaimed yet controversial episodes with Season 3's Fly, which was set almost entirely inside Gus Fring's superlab as Walter White and Jesse Pinkman work on a batch of meth, all while dealing with a pesky fly. It tapped into the anxieties of those characters at that particular point and suggested that they would have to make a move if they were going to gain control over operations. We saw the complications that followed between Walt and Jesse, and when rewatching this episode after we know what happens, it made it all the better. And while the new episode of Better Call Saul entitled Nippy isn't all set in one location, the events that take place make it a more self-contained episodes than ones we've seen before. And like Breaking Bad's Fly installment, it focused on some very important themes and beats. Whether that be a solution to Gene's Jeff problem, or a suggestion of what will happen to Gene as he re-embraces his slipping Jimmy persona. Throughout, it makes us ask, why are we watching this, and what is it telling us about the larger story at hand? Well, I'm going to get straight into my breakdown of everything that happened and discuss these exact questions. Starting with the build-up to episode 10, as we know from previous seasons, Gene Takovic is Jimmy McGill's post-Saul persona. It was an exchanged identity for a very large amount of money by the vacuum repairman Ed, and we learn that with this identity, Gene now manages a Cinnabon in Omaha, Nebraska. In the scenes with Gene from previous seasons, his life appears dull, but everything seemed to be safe up until the last time we saw him in Season 5. During his lunch break, he was interrupted by a cab driver and former Albuquerque resident, Jeff, who recognized him as Saul Goodman. This of course made Gene ring up Ed and ask him for another new identity. But after a few minutes, Gene changed his mind and told Ed that he's gonna fix it himself. That brings us to the new episode, which surprisingly is a full-on Gene installment following the reintroduction of Saul Goodman in the Breaking Bad era last week. And based on what happens at the end of this, it's actually quite fitting that we see what we do. But we start Nippy with the introduction of a comedy television legend in Carol Burnett, and she plays the character Marion, a fiery older woman who happens to be Jeff the cab driver's mother. None of us predicted that one. And before we learn of those details, Marion has an encounter with Gene on her way home from from the supermarket, and a ridge in the ice stops her from getting over a curb while using a mobility scooter. Gene is meanwhile posting signs about his lost dog Nippy, but pretends to help Marion, in turn deactivating her chair so he can push her back to her house and confront her son Jeff. So he's still at his slipping Jimmy ways, and once again he uses a scheme to get access to something he wants. That something is Jeff, who comes home and soon finds Gene sitting with his mother at the kitchen table, and once Jeff is able to speak with Gene alone outside, we finally learn what Gene plans to do to prevent Jeff from using his Saul Goodman identity against him. Like we've seen Saul do before, he aims to neutralize the situation by getting the subject involved in the game. By involving your target in a crime so that if they ever bite and try to give up your cover, you can then use the crime against them to nudge them into silence, or if worst comes to worst, both ships would sink in the process. Gene tells Jeff that he knows he doesn't want to turn him in because he would have already ratted him out and called the cops. And because of their previous conversation, he gambles that Jeff would be interested in learning and using a particular set of criminal skills to get in the game and pull off something that would help him out. I think what we see is Jeff motivated by the idea once Gene introduces him to it, similar to how we've seen Jimmy grow ideas on people before and make them believe that this is the way to go. But what's also possible is that Gene wants to get back in the game himself, and if he's able to silence the Jeff situation at the same time, it's a win-win situation. At the end of the episode, it becomes very clear that this is exactly what we are seeing. So what does this plan involve? Well, Gene aims to help Jeff devise a plan to steal in bulk from a department store in the mall he works at, and Gene himself will befriend and manipulate the chatty security guards that works there to give them the time to do so. One of these security guards is the character that takes away the shoplifter, which Gene helps them find, and the other is played by Jim O'Hare from Parks and Recreation, and he specifically is manipulated by the constant delivery of Cinnabons that Gene brings up to him. On his daily stops to the security room, he fakes his discussions about sports and times exactly how long it takes for the guard to eat the cinnamon roll, understanding the every detail of how to pull this con off and do it in secret. He also paces around the store, noting exactly how many steps it would take Jeff to get from one clothing item to the next. And he does so because then he can mark out a model of the store on a training field for Jeff to practice. When it does come to that practice with Jeff and his friend, who's also involved in delivering Jeff off in a shipping container, it gives us a crucial turning point for the whole heist. Jeff begins to doubt it all and seems ready to back out, but Gene, giving him the full convincing nature of Saul, continues to back it up and be persuasive. In doing so, he tells Jeff the tale of Walter White, a man who followed his advice and made millions in a year. He didn't explain all the issues and how that story ended, but the money perspective would always sell that idea. Eventually, he gets Jeff to follow through with it, and as I mentioned before, this is for two reasons. He needs evidence on Jeff as backup, and Gene feels genuinely good because he's pulling off a con once again. And when it comes time to execute that con, we get quite the tense scene. Everything goes to plan with Jeff sticking to the 3-minute 20 seconds limit, in which the security guard isn't looking at the monitors and is scoffing on the Cinnabon that Gene takes up to him. That's of course until Jeff slips on a recently polished section of the store floor and is knocked out by the fall for a few minutes. It's a hilarious yet incredibly tense scene as we watch Gene try to keep the guard distracted, and he does so by telling him stories that are inspired by some truth. He keeps his attention by discussing the deaths of family members and how he's now all alone. By using this real level of emotion, he appears convincing and gives Jeff enough time to get back to his feet and escape with the last lot of stolen clothing. It's eventually all a success, but now Gene must deal with what this means going forward. He eventually meets with Jeff and his friend back at the house and reveals to them that this is a one-time con, and if Jeff was ever to give up his identity as Saul, he would use this against them with the laws that they broke. And then there's also his mother Marion, who is still wondering how Gene could be so broken by the loss of his dog, yet forgot its name a couple of weeks later. Of course, there's no missing dog, and everything he does in this episode is about him returning back to those scheming ways that Slipping Jimmy and Saul Goodman completely encapsulate. And this is only solidified in the final scene of episode 10. We see Gene come back to the store on his lunch break, following the heist he just pulled off with Jeff, and he's drawn to a particular part of the store with fancy shirts that you'd expect Saul Goodman to purchase and wear. He holds it up over his body and looks at himself in the mirror, and for a brief moment, we get the sense that he can't deny those instincts that he's come back to many times before. And that's the Slipping Jimmy we've always known. Yes, he needed to pull this con off to survive and give Jeff a reason to not say anything, but when it comes down to the core of what happened, he did it because that's how he actually survives. It's what he's always known. He wants to use his criminal skills, and there's no better indicator than the ring that he put back on before undertaking this con, which was the same ring that he took on from his old con artist friend Marco. He doesn't want a new life or identity, he wants the one he's always known. But deep down, we're still asking, why does he want this kind of life forever? Well, I think we will get the answer to that question in the final 3 episodes, and I think it's no coincidence that Kim Wexler grew up in Nebraska, which is where Gene is currently hiding out. Is he looking for her, or hoping that one day he can have a moment that settles their story? Would he suit back up as Saul to pull something off that would get her attention? Or how would she react to him all these years later? It's all interesting questions, and I think it will all come down to how they will use something like this to give us an answer to Saul Goodman's identity. I think it will all come down to answering the question of, is he capable of changing, and can he overcome the same repeating pattern we've seen so many times before? It becomes the central talking point surrounding the story of Gene after this particular episode, and it makes this installment all the more important for what's to come. It's not a filler episode at all in that sense, and it even ties into the poster of season 6, which is a black and white shot of Gene putting on the red jacket. It's always been about the identity that Jimmy aligns with, and from looking at the history of this show, we'd guess that he'd be doomed to continue that. But whether he will change or not is something that the last few episodes will likely focus on, and I'm especially intrigued to see how this all connects to the Breaking Bad timeline, alongside the reintroductions of characters from that show, which we equally love. I trust these writers and showrunners when it comes to nailing the ending, and I think we're in for 3 huge episodes to end this fantastic show. But what are my overall thoughts on episode 10? Well, I do understand that Nippy is going to be quite the polarizing episode as a standalone endeavor, but it feels like a tribute to what Better Call Saul does superbly. A scaled back yet dramatically tense set of events that shows a conman in his element, all while displaying his inner feelings using subtle dialogue or moments with him. It showed us that no matter how many identities this person has, he'll always be Slipping Jimmy, and in turn, it seems like Chuck might have been right all along. The black and white footage and slower pacing might seem off-putting for a few people, but for me, it seems like a good choice after the more dramatic episodes to give us the opportunity to really think about all the death and heartbreak. It allows us to anticipate what lies ahead for Gene and how the Breaking Bad era episode episodes will link into what we see. Now that Jeff has essentially been used to light the match of Saul, we realise that Saul will never go. He's always there, waiting inside of Gene, and there's no stopping him from re-emerging. Being that con man is his one true love, and it will likely be his big downfall. Yes, he loves Kim, and I'm sure we'll get a conclusion to that in the next 3 episodes, but it's clear that when Gene breaks a smile in looking at that Saul-like shirt, he can't wait to put that suit back on. I can see us getting one last ride with Saul in the Gene timeline, and it will be interesting to see how they conclude it and what messages it gives us towards the end of this story. But overall, I thought this was a wonderfully shot and told episode to really echo what this show is interrogating and how it might all end. We'll just have to see what happens, but after a flash forward this week, I suspect we'll be seeing a return to the Breaking Bad timeline in the next 2 episodes, and hopefully it will be what we've all waited for. But that was my spoiler review and recap for Better Call Saul Season 6 Episode 10. I'm giving it a rating of 9.5 out of 10. But to those who have already seen this episode, what are your thoughts on all the events that went down, and what do you think will happen in episode 11? Let me know down below in the comment section. For more videos on the final episodes of Better Call Saul Season 6, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.